In this video, we're talking about some no doubt about it great wide receivers, but everybody is wrong about them for this year in fantasy. And we'll start with Cooper Kupp, who y'all are doing this man dirty right now based on where he goes in fantasy drafts, just kind of burying his name. Now, we all know that this guy's been nothing short of incredible throughout his NFL career, and he's a true warrior, a guy who will play for your money. He plays injured. Remember when he came back in 2019 after having a season-ending injury, and what does he do? He puts up to that point career highs in everything: 134 targets, 94 catches, over 1,100 receiving yards, a monster, and then he never looked back. And this is a guy who was carted off of the field in a game and then returned in the second half, the first and maybe only guy I've ever seen do that. And now look, I get it. Since then, he's only gotten older, had a lot more injuries, and now he's competing with the guy who set the rookie receiving record last year in Puka Nacua. So I understand why people aren't as excited to be getting him this year. However, it's not like you have to spend a first-round draft pick on him or like he's going to be a top 5 overall player like in past seasons. Because no, right now in drafts, Cooper Kupp goes outside the top 20 wide receivers. Top 20 wide receivers. He's going 35th overall in drafts right now. He's going after guys like Stephon Diggs, which I don't necessarily agree with. And of course, there's reasons for this. He let a lot of people down last year and the year before that. 2022, his season ended with an ankle injury that put him out for the rest of the year. You can see that right here on Player Profiler. In week 10, he had that ankle injury, and then you see in 2023, his season starts with a hamstring strain in the preseason, ends up hurting his ankle as well during this time, which ends up with him landing on the PUP list, misses 4 weeks, finally gets back and healthy around midseason, and then suffers an ankle sprain, another ankle injury, and that kind of derails the final month or two of his season. But despite all of this, and Puka Nacua setting rookie records as good as you could possibly have, probably in maybe will be a career high year for Puka Nacua in his first year. Despite all that, Cooper Kupp still averaged 8 targets per game when he was out there and healthy. That actually was a higher number because he left one game early, so it's going to impact that, and finished 23rd in fantasy points per game. Again, this number was actually higher. He was a top 20 receiver last year when you take out his week 11 game where he only had 3 points because he left early due to an injury. And last year was probably worst case scenario, like Puka Nacua having a borderline career year and dealing with multiple injuries for Cooper Kupp, yet still, Kupp earned a first read target share of 29% compared to Nacua's of 30%. So basically, they were virtually the same, that means, in terms of the priority for Matthew Stafford, where he was looking and throwing to first. And not only that, but check this out right here. I dug into some of the numbers. Cooper Kupp completed 11 games healthy last year, started and completed. In those games, he averaged 14.8 fantasy points per game and 8.5 targets. In those same 11 games right here for Puka Nacua, he averages 15.5 fantasy points and 8.5 targets. So they're earning the same amount of volume. Puka Nacua is earning less than a fantasy point more per game, but despite this, Nacua is going in round 1 and Cooper Kupp is going in like round 3 and 4 of drafts. And it does help that Cooper Kupp still has a great coach in Sean McVay, a good quarterback to great quarterback in Matthew Stafford, depending on the season and the injuries that he's dealing with. So I'm not necessarily saying that Cooper Kupp is a must draft. No, I'm just thinking that a lot of people have it wrong. They're burying dirt on this guy's name when I still do think that his ceiling outcome is a top 10 wide receiver. And where he's currently being drafted, yeah, he's fine at that point in the draft if some other guys are gone. Now, another guy that I think a lot of people are getting it wrong on right now is Jaden Reed, the Packers wide receiver who's currently being drafted as their clear-cut number 1 option because he's going in round 6, and I think that this is far, way too early. I mean, let's look at some of the names that he's currently going before. He's currently going before Calvin Ridley. Okay, I think that that's wrong. He's currently, I mean, you could say a lot of these names. Marquise Brown, you scroll a little bit more, you start to see guys like Kyler Murray, who at his position has way more upside. Even Evan Ingram at his position has way more upside. Maybe even the number 1 option for that Trevor Lawrence team. Deontay Johnson, the number 1 wide receiver for his new team, the Panthers. Zamir White, a workhorse back now for the Raiders. I don't understand why Jaden Reed's going before these guys. And look, in his rookie season, he was exciting, right? A second-round pick. Matt LaFleur used him in very exciting ways as a rusher on these end-arounds, as a guy who's a gadget guy on screenplays, and even downfield. He succeeded in all those areas. And if you're not familiar with the fella, yeah, he was a second-round pick, about a mid-second-round pick last year, and I said middle, like middle of the second round, not a mid-player, of course. And this is what he did his final year of college. His final couple of years at Michigan State, he goes out there, he has a 1,000-yard season, and then he comes in his final year, it drops a little bit. Different quarterbacks played in less games overall, and he goes to the NFL draft after that, and he has a nice first season in the NFL. Across 16 games, this is some pretty solid year 1 stats. 64 catches, 4 catches per game, about 50 receiving yards per game. I mean, it's nothing crazy. It's nothing phenomenal or insane, but because he scores 8 touchdowns, he ends up as a top 26 wide receiver, 26th overall. So this is pretty good for a second-round rookie that there weren't a lot of expectations, at least becoming right away a top 30 receiver. But that's just looking at the accounting stats because there's a lot of context that isn't put in there that I don't think is going going to benefit him as he heads into 2024. First up, last year, Reed saw a lot more snaps than usual because Christian Watson was hurt, which is a shocker. But now Christian Watson, and I say that sarcastically because he's been hurt his first 2 years, but now Watson has kind of figured out his hamstring issue, why it was wrong, and he's actually improved it. So it looks like, at least in theory, he should be remaining on the field. But that allowed Jaden Reed last year to get into 2 wide receiver sets more often with Romeo Doubs, and he got just to play more snaps, more opportunities downfield, and more targets. However, with Watson now back and healthy, Romeo Doubs still in the team, and even Dontavian Wicks, a fellow rookie last year who they loved and put on the outside a lot, an awesome route runner, it's going to be hard for Reed to get on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, meaning he's like a part-time slot player. And that's exactly what he was in college for the most part, and that's exactly what he was for the Packers last year. He played 67% of his snaps in the slot, and the majority of his snaps that weren't in the slot when they were actually on the outside, it was like I said, when guys like Christian Watson were hurt last year. So now I'm looking at this team, and Reed is going as the number 1 wide receiver on it, even though Christian Watson's going to play more snaps and probably earn more targets. Romeo Doubs is going to play more snaps, maybe earn more targets. Dontavian Wicks might threaten for just as many snaps and as many targets as Jaden Reed, and I'm just starting to question why spend the pick on Jaden Reed. And there was even proof last year. You can see these are via player profiler, his game logs. So you see week 1 right here, his snap share, you can see 53%. That's the amount of snaps he played in week 1. Let's go all the way down to the postseason, the most important games on the year. You have Jaden Reed playing 47% of the snaps, so less than 50% of the snaps in their most important game in the playoffs against the Cowboys. And then in their second round game, he only plays 62% of the snaps. This is a part-time player. This is a guy that's getting rotated through with 4 other receivers, rarely ever playing on the outside when everybody else was healthy last year. It's not the type of guy you want to be spending a 6th round pick on, in my opinion, because I just genuinely do not see the upside. Especially when you consider that Matt LaFleur loves to run the ball, right? They end up signing Josh Jacobs, get younger at the running back position. They bring back A.J. Dillon. They get a 3rd round speed and size and broken tackle guy in Marshawn Lloyd. So you have these guys who are going to run the ball. They still have 2 quality tight ends. Tucker Kraft, one of the best blocking tight ends, not just for rookies last year, but overall. Luke Musgrave is still there, not known as a blocker, but they have other guys on this team. You have Ben Sims, you have Tyler Davis, guys who can block on this team, be used as a fullback as well. They're going to want to run the ball. They're going to have a lot of two wide receiver formations, which means that there's just even more of an increased chance that Reed is not on the field, let alone the other wide receivers who will be out there as well. So the guys on the screen right now are just players I would rather have over Jaden Reed. Marquise Brown, who has arguably a chance to be the number 1 receiver for Patrick Mahomes. Calvin Ridley arguably has the chance, we'll talk about him in a second though, arguably has a chance though to be a number 1 receiver for Will Levis, however much that's worth for you. But even guys who go later across different positions, across the tight end position, Deontay Johnson is somebody that I much rather would have at this point based on what his ceiling is as a potential wide receiver 1 in an improved Panthers offense. Jaden Reed is one of the names who projections are going to but when you actually factor in what his overall snap share is, it gets a little bit murky. Now the next man that a lot of people have just everything wrong about is Chris Godwin, because kind of similar to Cooper Kupp, except not the same in terms of the injuries that Kupp is dealing with. It's just a veteran receiver who is just being buried right now in drafts. And on the surface, it's like, okay, Sal, well, of course he is. He finishes the wide receiver 34 last year. If you scroll based on his past finishes of the wide receiver 15, a top 10 finish, 15, obviously that elite season with the Bucs when he finished 2nd overall, this was his worst season, and you have to go all the way back to about 6 years, his rookie year or the year after that. But like Cooper Kupp and Jaden Reed, these final numbers don't give you all of the context, because I would say Chris Godwin might have been the most unlucky or unluckiest, whichever one of those, I think it's unluckiest, wide receiver in the league last year. And I want to start with this. He was quality. He was earning almost 8 targets per game, so top 20 wide receiver usage in terms of volume last year, still able to earn targets at a high rate. You can see his target share, even dealing with Mike Evans, who is having if not the best, the 2nd best year of his career, still earning 24% of the targets. Pretty solid. Top 24 receiver in the entire league is good there. But then here's the issue. This is the big kicker right here. He only scored 3 touchdowns or 2 touchdowns last year, only 3 the year before that. If this guy is just getting average touchdowns, which for him is 5 touchdowns in a season, this 34th overall finish is getting closer to a top 20 finish, right around a top 20 finish. But here's the big piece. This is PFF's expected points chart. And you can see Chris Godwin right here was expected to score the 6th most or the 27th most touchdowns, which for him that would have been tied for this number right over here. We can scroll over. I know it's a lot of numbers. I'll highlight it for you. 6.2 touchdowns is the expected based on his usage of 130 targets, almost 8 per game. On average, a player in Chris Godwin's situation should have scored over 6 touchdowns. And this is why I say he's extremely unlucky, because he only scored 2. So if he just had his average year last year and got those 6 touchdowns, 4 more or so, this 34th would have actually been about the 18th overall wide receiver in fantasy, and then nobody is drafting him where they're currently drafting him in the middle rounds of drafts. Nobody is saying, oh, he doesn't have it anymore. And oftentimes these guys who get unlucky with touchdowns, they regress, if you want to say, they bounce back the next year, and they get, if not more touchdowns, at least the average. But that's not the only thing that worked against Godwin last year. What worked against him was also the way that his coach was using him, and Dave Canales. He only played 32% of the time out of the slot last year. That was not great. Now, they ran the ball a lot, so they only had 2 receivers on the field, so he was pushed to the outside, but that was not great by any means for Chris Godwin, who normally is playing at least 50+% of the snaps. The year before that, 55% of the snaps out of the slot. That's where he's always dominated. That's where he's had his big season. And now you're forcing him, pigeonholing him to the outside, even though he's a great slot receiver as well. But the good news is he now is a new offensive coordinator. Dave Canales, who was great in his own right, has gone over to coach the Panthers, and the new offensive coordinator is a man named Liam Cohen. Now, who the heck is Liam Cohen? Well, let me just give you a little bit of a hint. He spent some time in the past from 2018 to 2020 as a coach in just different parts for the wide receivers for the Rams, for the quarterbacks. Then he goes to Kentucky in 2021, and he coaches Will Levis. Remember Will Levis, the quarterback that's on the Tennessee Titans now? He coached him there, goes back to the Rams in 2022 as an offensive coordinator, then goes back to Kentucky in 2023. So he's kind of all over the place as an offensive coordinator, but here's the saving grace. He's already said multiple times this offseason that Chris Godwin is going back into the slot. He's going back into the slot a lot more, which is good because every other year that he's been in the slot the past 5 years, he's been a top 15 fantasy receiver, and that's even having unlucky seasons with only like 3 touchdowns in those years. And this is important to know because Chris Godwin was still good last year. He ranked 28th in the NFL in first downs per route run, which ranked ahead of guys like Amari Cooper, T. Higgins, and Michael Pittman. And not to mention the guy was earning 8 targets per game. One more thing to note is that, okay, look, they didn't really bring anybody in. They drafted a 3rd-round wide receiver in Jalen McMillan, probably the 3rd best wide receiver on the Washington Huskies last year in college. I think he's more so going to be competing with Trey Palmer, who was a nice, speedy receiver, benefited out of the slot and out wide, the fastest receiver in last year's draft. I don't think he's going to be threatening Chris Godwin for a role in 2 wide receiver sets or even the slot role. So despite the down year last season, I am still interested in Chris Godwin, who you can see right here. Chris Godwin goes as the 66th overall player in like round 6 or 7. I'm 8 spots ahead of him in the fantasy blueprint. He's my 58th overall player. You can see right there if you want to just zoom in a little bit. All right, there we go. Beautiful. It is a nice spot to be taking Chris Godwin, in my opinion. You are all too wrong based on where he's currently going. All right, now we're going to talk about a guy that we kind of hinted at earlier. So let's go back to this wide receiver, number 4. For this video. 4, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there you go. You can count 4. And this man's name is Calvin Ridley, the newest member of the revamped Tennessee Titans. And Ridley currently goes in round 6 to 7 of fantasy drafts. And fellas, that honestly is wrong. And now everybody's waiting on which side. Is he going too late? Is he going too early? And as much as I want to say Calvin Ridley is going too late, he's going too early. He's going too early. But let's not disrespect this man because he returned last year from a long suspension from gambling. He had some injuries before that, mental health stuff before that. And he finally comes back to the NFL in 2023 after like 2 years off of football. He plays in every single game. And he earns 136 targets and still proves that he can be a guy out there who can earn targets, even though he was used in an improper role, in my opinion, with the Jaguars last year. This dude proved last year, if you just watch the film, you can watch either all 136 targets, his 76 catches, or just a sample here and there of his highlights. He can still run routes and win at all levels of the field. And if I'm being completely honest with you, a month ago, I would have been all in on Ridley. I would have said, okay, Calvin Ridley looks like a great wide receiver to put next to DeAndre Hopkins, the X receiver. Ridley will be able to work in 2 wide receiver sets with less attention. He'll be able to move into the slot in 3 wide receiver sets, which is really where he really gets to be versatile and earn yards after the catch and show his route running and how he can get open and pile on those extra 2-3 catches a game that really help with fantasy. And his brand new coaching staff, led by Brian Callahan from the Cincinnati Bengals the last few seasons, was saying all the right things. They said, we saw how he was used last year with Jacksonville, not so great. We're going to make sure that he's used in a proper way this year with us. Because you see, last year, Calvin Ridley was just put into this role on the outside. He was asked to just run go routes, vertical routes, which does not show his skill set as a route runner. And he's not known for being a speedy guy. So it was kind of the weirdest role ever. You didn't really get the most out of Ridley, which is no shocker that he ends up putting up some of the worst numbers, if not the worst, of his career in efficiency. His yards per route run, just 48th in the league. 1.6 yards per route run is like as average as it gets. This is a guy who is normally in the top, at the very worst, top 30, top 24, and top 10 more often. So all of this context kind of paints the picture like, okay, Calvin Ridley is now going to be in a better situation. Sal, why is he going too late in drafts? Well, I have to give you the other context that makes it not so good for drafting him, in my opinion, like round 6 or even 7. And this is really the big one that threw me for a little bit of a loop. You can see right here, Tyler Boyd was a recent signing compared to like free agency a couple months later by this Tennessee Titans team. Tyler Boyd with the Cincinnati Bengals. He was a slot receiver for them for a while, a very successful one at that. And let me remind you what I just said earlier. His new coach, the new coach for the Tennessee Titans, is Brian Callahan, who was the offensive coordinator the last 5 years, not only for the Cincinnati Bengals, but also Cincinnati Bengals are the last 4 years, 19, 20, 21, 20, no, 5 years. That's 5, right? 19 to 23. Last 5 years for the offensive coordinator, Tyler Tyler Boyd on the Bengals. So he handpicked Tyler Boyd and said, oh yeah, I want that guy. And this guy has already said, Brian Callahan has already said they're going to throw the ball more this year. He's made it a point to say we're going to throw the ball and use more 3 wide receiver sets. And now you just got your slot receiver from the last 5 years who you love throwing to and we're targeting like 100 times a year, even with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase there. Yeah, I think Tyler Boyd is going to be this team slot receiver, which hurts Calvin Ridley. He's not going to be put in the slot as much. And that starts to become a real issue because DeAndre Hopkins is just a prototypical X receiver. He'll be on the X, the outside, the boundary guy, the first read a lot of the times. Tyler Boyd will be in the slot in 3 wide receiver sets, which leaves Ridley potentially in a similar role as he was last year. Now, I do think he'll be moved around a lot more than he was in Jacksonville. He'll rotate into the slot. He'll get nice reps in 2 wide receiver sets, but it is a little bit sketchy because I don't think he's going to see as many slot snaps now with Boyd there, and he's getting a quarterback downgrade, of course, in my opinion, from Trevor Lawrence to Will Levis. All of this makes it a little bit concerning, and I don't want to be taking Ridley where he currently goes. You can see Ridley is my 87th ranked player. In ADP, he goes 69th overall, so I'm 18 rounds ahead. I know a lot of people like Ridley this year, but for these reasons, I just can't get there. Not only are my projections, but everything I'm actually seeing, if you just put in some human reasoning, is saying that I would definitely rather have DeAndre Hopkins, who DeAndre Hopkins goes well after him in fantasy drafts right now. I would definitely rather have, or at least it's a toss-up, but I would prefer, if I had to choose, Deontay Johnson at the exact same position as well. Even heck, you can get me into talking about Christian Watson the more that the summer goes on and positive news comes out about his hamstring. So maybe that one you were on the same page with me with, although right now in drafts he's going way earlier, so I don't think a lot of people were, but this next one I think is going to get a lot of people upset. But before we get to this guy, I just want to let you know about the Fantasy Blueprint. If you want to win your fantasy league, and I'm looking to help people do that, beat their friends, get to the playoffs, and win a championship, this is going to be for you. You just click this button right here to get access, and you can get a risk-free, I'll repeat that, a risk-free Fantasy Blueprint by signing up with one of our 2 partners right here. And if this does not work for you, well, then there's another option down here just in case that doesn't work and everybody can get it. Now, I say risk-free because if you go through one of our 2 partners, it's just going to cost you $10 for the entire year. But here's the key. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs, you get a refund. And it's the entire year for your draft, and then every single week of the regular season, one-time payment of $10 if you go through our partners. Otherwise, it's completely refunded if you don't make the playoffs. It's going to have all the tools and analysis you need to do just that while preparing for the draft and every week of the year. So to get it today and join the over 10,000 people who have used it and are currently using the Blueprint to make their playoffs, you can click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen. Beautiful people, go get it. Not now, but right now. Now that player that people are going to be upset about me is going to be, look, it's George Pickens. He's currently going in the 4th or 5th rounds of drafts, and here's the thing. I get the fandom. I get it. I get the Steelers fans that'll be in the comments here, that'll be on other social media saying, you hate George Pickens. How is he not a top 30 receiver for you? I get it. You're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're going to have a bias. And as much as you don't want to say that, have you watched all 1,000 of his NFL routes, all 191 of his targets? Odds are you did not watch him on those. I'm just saying. And some people might point to some of the obvious things. Deontay Johnson is no longer on this team, as you can see right here on the team changes page. And then you end up seeing, oh, they got a quarterback upgrade. There's no longer Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, and Mitch Trubisky. It's now Russell Wilson and maybe Justin Fields. But Russell Wilson is going to be the guy, 95% going to be starting week 1 from everything they're saying. They got some offensive line improvement, although it was already a good offensive line. Everything is looking good for George Pickens, whose number 1 competition right now at the receiver position might be this 3rd round rookie Roman Wilson out of Michigan, who's a talented, speedy player, but not a guy who's going to earn maybe 120 plus targets. And I'll say all those things are good for Pickens, as well as him being an elite talent, just an athletic freak who can make these boundary contested catches. Everything there is good as well. But the problem is this guy has never earned an elite target share, and I'm not really sure that Russell Wilson on this team with a new offensive coordinator and Arthur Smith who wants to run the ball, I'm not sure that that's going to be the combination to get him an elite target share. And it's okay if you're going in like round 7 or 8 of fantasy drafts to not have an elite target share and only earn 20 to 22% on a low volume offense. But when you're George Pickens going as a top 50 pick right now in drafts, end of the 4th round, beginning of the 5th round, you need to have a ceiling. You need to have a ceiling of a lot of targets in your offense and show a history of being able to do that. He has not shown that in college or the NFL, earn an elite target share. And I could already hear all the Pittsburgh fans in my mentions getting annoyed by this. I think the dude is extremely talented. He's just always been this downfield receiver, and the supporting cast and the offense and the way they're going to use this is not so great. And yes, I've actually made it a point to go back and watch his 106 targets last year, his 85 targets the year before that, and even a bunch of his other routes. He's ran a little bit over 1,000 routes in the NFL regular season. I've even watched some more of those to say, this dude's a freak on the outside. He's great. I'm a little bit skeptical based on his skill set. It is still raw. What he can do in the middle of the field, how consistently he can do that, and that's probably, if he started to earn more targets there, it's going to impact his downfield explosiveness where he saw a lot of upside last year. Because George Pickens ranked number 1 in the NFL, averaging 18.1 yards per catch. Top 5 with 10.8 yards per target. He was getting downfield usage, and downfield usage should pair well with Russell Wilson, you think, but it's not to the point where he's going to earn 150 targets or earn the usage, in my opinion, to finish as a 4th or a 5th round receiver unless he has a crazy touchdown year, which you can say that for basically any wide receiver in this range. Because like I mentioned earlier, his new head coach, or his new offensive coordinator, I should say, or check that, it's still Mike Tomlin, the head coach, but his new offensive coordinator is Arthur Smith, who loves to run the ball and not really uses receivers. You remember Drake London? This is Drake London's last 2 years with Arthur Arthur Smith as his coach, finishing as the wide receiver 43 and the wide receiver 42, despite not having any competition for targets in terms of his wide receiver room, just like you're going to have this year with George Pickens. No competition for targets, but a heavily run-first offense. And yeah, Drake London didn't have great quarterback play, right? Marcus Mariota, Desmond Ridder, these guys are Taylor Heineke. These guys aren't great. Russell Wilson is an upgrade for sure. In terms of being the quarterback this year, you can see right here, Russell Wilson 4-1 George Pickens. But look, Russell Wilson's not really the guy who's going to sustain a number one wide receiver season anytime recently. Because this is Courtland Sutton, the number one receiver last year by far for Russell Wilson. He finishes the wide receiver 38. Not that great, even though he had 10 touchdowns. He had 10 touchdowns and still only finishes the wide receiver 38. Why? Because he was getting downfield targets from Russell Wilson, not consistent overall volume, as you can see right here in 16 games, just 59 receptions in a somewhat run-first offense last year in Denver. And all these things are again going to happen. It's going to be even more run-first with Arthur Smith, with the same quarterback who's going to throw the ball downfield, but not consistently enough over the middle to help a number one receiver. So I get that the competition isn't there, and I get that he has a quarterback upgrade, and he's an elite talent. All of those things are factored into my ranking of him, but also I'm factoring in the bad things, which outweigh the good. So I'm sorry for triggering the Steelers fans, but I just rather have these guys who go after him. Definitely Joe Mixon across different positions. Definitely Kenneth Walker across different positions. And I would have T. Higgins. I would have Tank Dell. I would have Christian Kirk. All these guys who go after him, I think they're better options. So again, Steelers fans, I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm winking double time right there, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry for triggering you. That's just my opinion. You can keep yours. If you want to draft them, go ahead. We don't have to go all crazy, but you probably will. Now, I have two bonus players for you because I think that these guys can actually win leagues and they're also being disrespected based on where they're going. But before we get there, over 60% of you aren't subscribed to this channel, and I think I just lost all the Steelers fans, but seriously, I have a goal to get to 50%. Just 50% of the people who watch these videos, I want them to be subscribed. Only 40% currently are. It takes 2 seconds. A lot of people just don't even remember. You're watching on your TV, a tablet, your phone, and it's just not as convenient. Just takes 2 seconds. I understand that it could be inconvenient, but I appreciate if you can do that for me. Now, the first one of those players we'll quickly talk about, a bonus player, is going to be Tank Dell, who is currently the third wide receiver off the board in this Texans offense behind Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs. And look, maybe that's right, maybe it's not, but I just really don't agree with it. Because I believe that Tank Dell's eventually going to be going before Stephon Diggs, where I currently have him ranked in my rankings in fantasy drafts, so you might as well get the value while you can. Because this is a dude who has a rookie last year, a middle round rookie, and everybody said he was undersized, was top 15 in yards per out run, wide receiver efficiency against all the NFL top cornerbacks, and he finished top 20 in fantasy points per game, including a game where he left early. If he didn't leave that game early and wasn't impacted, he would have been a top 15 receiver last year. Young receiver coming into the prime of his career, good connection last year with one CJ Stroud. And despite being a smaller receiver in terms of weight and height, he still won on the outside and was dominant there over 70% of the time. I think it's actually going to be one Stephon Diggs who misses out in this offense. In terms of who's going to be on the field the most, I think these guys right here, Nico Collins and Tank Dell, are going to be on the field the most in my opinion. Stephon Diggs, if not right away, definitely towards the end of the season, will transition into more of a slot role, which means less snaps and targets. So I think Tank Dell goes way too late in drafts. And I also think y'all are tripping about Malik Neighbors. Honestly, like just so much at this point. Malik Neighbors goes in the 4th rounds of drafts, just far too late, and I really don't understand why. I just think that everyone is wrong about Neighbors and mostly the Giants situation. People are scared about this offense because how bad it was last year. It's a totally different offense now. Like for starters, they lost their starting quarterback Daniel Jones last year, and they had to play with a guy in Tommy DeVito who was better at being a caricature of himself, acting as like an Italian mobster with him and his agent compared to actually playing the quarterback position. And then they lost their top offensive lineman, Andrew Thomas, a tackle last year, Darren Waller, who they built their entire offense around in the middle of the field. He ends up getting hurt and missing most of the year. Yeah, obviously it's going to be a different offense now. For starters, they get their quarterback in Daniel Jones back. They're going to have a healthier offensive line. They signed a couple of guys in free agency as well. And they have a nice, young, talented wide receiver core. Not only Malik Neighbors, but they have Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt. These guys entering their 2nd or 3rd year in the NFL. So it's a nice little nucleus, if you would, around Daniel Jones. And on a serious note, with Waller gone and Saquon gone, I really don't know who's going to threaten Malik Neighbors for not having wide receiver 1 usage, if that's the right way to say that. He's going to have wide receiver 1 usage, over 24 to 25% of the targets, which right away should put him above the 4th round. I mean, you look at a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., also a rookie. These guys are both top 6 picks in this year's NFL draft. He's going as a borderline 1st round pick, right? 16th overall player in 12-team leagues. He's arguably taken in the 1st round a lot of times or right at the turn, even though he was viewed as a very similar prospect as Malik Neighbors coming out. Some people even like Malik Neighbors more because what he can do after the catch and his explosiveness. And yeah, there's no doubt about it that Marvin Harrison has the better quarterback in this situation with Kyler Murray, but there's also no doubt about it that he has more competition, I would say, because Trey McBride is still there. Trey McBride, a great tight end last year, was still there. And honestly, number 2 in yards per out run last season. If anything, he's still going to be threatening for 100 to 120 plus targets this year compared to really nobody being that threat in the Giants offense. But I get it. The reason why people are scared is the Giants offense has been terrible lately. They lost some of their playmakers in Waller and Saquon, and Daniel Jones is the quarterback. But let me remind you, Daniel Jones, in his last fully healthy season, 2022, which was also his first year with Brian Daboll and this new coaching staff, what does he do and go out there? His true completion percentage, number 1 in the NFL. When you take away throwaways and drop passes, the most accurate quarterback. Now, he wasn't throwing downfield all that much, as you can see right here. Air yards per attempt just 31st in the league, so he was completing easier passes that he should have, but he was still completing them, and he ranked top 10 in expected points added, an efficiency metric for quarterbacks. This was while he was only throwing for 200 yards per game that year. He had no weapons. He had absolutely no weapons at all in 2022. And now he actually has a weapon, and I expect him and Brian Dable and this whole coaching staff to make sure that Malik Neighbors is treated like a playmaker, because he's the only playmaker on this team. So everybody is wrong about Malik Neighbors based on where he's going drafted, as well as the other 6 receivers we talked about in this video. But now if you want to see the running backs, who I believe everybody is wrong on, and here's why, well, you could check out this beautiful video right here. I believe we talked about 6 running backs total in that one.